Hey guys, so this will be the last video on Mark 1, 1 through 8. I want to point out one more detail about this passage that I think really is the focus of this passage, and that is, why did God send John the Baptist before he sent Jesus? That really goes back to the quotations he has from the Old Testament. Remember in Mark 1, 2, he quotes from Malachi 3, 1, and in verse 3, he quotes from Isaiah 43. And in both of those, it uses the word prepare. Malachi 3:1 says that God would send a messenger who will prepare your way. And then Isaiah 43 says that this voice calling out in the wilderness will prepare the way of the Lord. These Old Testament prophecies show that John the Baptist was sent to prepare the way for God, to prepare the way for Jesus coming. Now, listen, John the Baptist was a very famous guy. People came from all over the place. Even in the verses we read here in Mark 1, 1 through 8, it says they came from all over. They came from Jerusalem, which is a city that is not crazy far from the Jordan River if you're driving, but if you're walking, it's pretty far. And all over the region of Judea, that means think about Judea as like a state. So from all over the state, if we can think of it that way. People were coming to the Jordan River to be baptized by John. He was a famous guy. I've actually read a lot of like historians from that time who wrote about John the Baptist, non-Christian historians who wrote about him because he was so well respected by everyone, and they looked up to him, and they looked up to his message that he preached. He was very respected, and he was recognized as being a prophet. And there were no prophets during that time except John the Baptist, and so it was a big deal. But listen to what he says at the end here in Mark 1, 1 through 8. Verse 7 says, he was preaching, saying, one who is mightier than me is coming after me, whom I am not worthy to bend down and untie his sandal. In other words, John said, Jesus is greater than me. John's entire ministry was focused around pointing other people to Jesus. In fact, there's one event later where some of John's disciples come to him and say, John, there's a problem. Jesus is gaining all kinds of disciples. He has more disciples than you now. In fact, a lot of your disciples are leaving you and they're going to follow John. And some of the more well-known disciples that we know were actually John the Baptist's disciples first. And so they said, John, there's the problem. You're losing a bunch of your followers because they're following Jesus. And John's response was, this is the way it's supposed to be. I'm supposed to decrease, and he is supposed to increase. Everything in John's life was focused on pointing people to Jesus, and he was humble about it. He recognized, even though he was famous and could have really just sought after that fame and tried to become even more popular. In fact, people gave him the opportunity. They came to him and said, are you the Christ? Because they were ready to make him the Messiah. But he said no. He said, I'm going to, instead of trying to build on this popularity, I'm going to use it to point people to Jesus. And that's what he did with everything. John decreased so that Jesus would increase in his life. That's an extremely important message for us as believers today. How are you pointing people to Jesus? Everything in John's life was about pointing people to Christ. And we too, as believers today, need to make our popularity, our gifts, whatever God gives us, we need to use those things to point other people to Jesus.